Scarlett, I have a question. There are 7 specific diagnoses that allow someone to get on the wait list for services. So I kind of wanted to go through each one in a coffee chat and have you talk about each category. The
Okay.
first being intellectual disabilities. Can you talk more about that and what the IQ of 70 or below means for a person?
Yes, yes. So the intellectual disability is probably the biggest catch-all category. And we've talked before about specific syndromes, and as research increases, there are more and more syndromes. So waiver doesn't necessarily put each of those. I mean, there are some of the specifics. There's Prader-Willi, there's Phelan-McDermid, which was just added. Um, Down syndrome. There are some of the specifics, but intellectual disability is by APD's definition is categorized by an IQ of 70 or below, in addition to lower functioning levels in social, self-care skills, communication, ability to live independently. So it's not just that IQ score that they're looking for. They're actually looking for someone who really truly can't live independently and function independently and has these deficits.
Mhm.
So again, like we talked about with specifically your daughter, she has a very rare genetic disorder.
Mhm.
But at the time, when you were trying to get on the waiver and the wait list, or the wait list and the waiver, she didn't meet one of those specific criteria. So you mentioned that you had to actually have further testing done. I think we talked about, was it a TONI, test of nonverbal intelligence?
I actually don't know the name. I just know that we made an appointment with a developmental pediatrician and asked for an IQ test.
Yes, yes. And so, a lot of times I have parents who are like, well, how are they going to test my child's IQ? They don't speak. So there are several different tests that can test for nonverbal intelligence. The most common is called the TONI, test of nonverbal intelligence. I think they're on the 5th edition now. But yeah, so intellectual disability is probably the most broad category, but it's not just based on that single IQ score. It's based on adaptive and functioning skills as well, and those deficits.
Okay.
Mhm.
Are those tests all done by a developmental pediatrician, or do you have to go to different specialists for all of those?
Um, Usually developmental pediatricians, I don't usually see them doing IQ testing.
Okay.
Um, Usually that's a psychologist or a school psychologist. So APD has specific people who can diagnose for specific disabilities. So, and that's an interesting one, because with IQ scores, they will take testing from a developmental pediatrician, I believe, a neurologist, a school psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, neuropsychiatrist. Um, but but not to change lanes or subjects, with the ASD or autism diagnosis, a school psychologist is not allowed to diagnose that. It's very specific. It can only be a licensed clinical psychologist.
Okay. That's an interesting,
So, which is really frustrating for parents, because a lot of parents rely on the school system to do the diagnosing, and schools don't usually have licensed clinical psychologists. They have licensed school psychologists. So it really is probably going to be extremely problematic down the road. There has been a push to take school psychologists off of even diagnosing intellectual disability, which if that does happen, that's the burden of diagnosing is going to fall to parents to pay privately to have that diagnostic done.
and it seems often there's a very long wait list for that kind of service.
Yes.
You have to wait just to get the testing done. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've had families reach out to me to see if I can recommend another psychologist, because they're on an 18-month wait. well, it's better now that COVID's not as ramped up as it was. But during COVID, it was, I mean, the wait lists were, most of the psychologists and school psychologists I knew were on 6 months to 18 months was the longest wait list I had heard of, which, yeah, yeah. And then that's just to get the diagnosis
Mhm.
to then,
Apply
you know,
for the waiver.
yeah, exactly.
Gosh.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you.